Greetings and welcome back to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's webinar series. My name is John Rizek and I'm the Senior Director of Alumni Networks and your host today. Hey, Happy New Year, everybody. It's been a while since our last one in late November, and thanks to all the alumni and friends who've made time to join us live today. Looking forward to this topic. We've had this presenter on before, we've talked a lot about how you might go to a great networking event and collect business cards. However, if you fail to follow up afterwards, it's as if the networking never happened. So today's presenter will be spending some time talking about how to make your networking contacts work for you. But before that, just want to mention that this webinar is part of an ongoing free series being offered by the University of Minnesota Alumni Association, where we're having conversations with experts about career, life, and learning topics. Through last November, we've had over 7,800 day of attendees of these webinars. Thank you so much. And if whether you're a first-time attendee or multiple-time attendee, if you found value in these webinars, consider becoming a member of the Alumni Association and helping to support our mission and our outreach. And you can learn more by visiting umnalumni.org/membership. Also, we rolled this out right before the holiday season last year, the Minnesota Alumni Market, where we're featuring alumni makers who have some unique products, and we're featuring those. And here's just some of a sample of them, but we think it's a great way for alumni and friends to discover unique Minnesota products while also helping fellow alumni. And you can learn more at mnalumnimarket.com. As I mentioned, this is a webinar series, and so we have 8 more between now and April, with 3 of them coming up in February: social media do's and don'ts on February 1st, shatter your business ceiling on February 13th, and on February 22nd, effective team building and management. And you can find all of that at umnalumni.org/virtual. And also, if you're new to the series or would like just to check out the full webinar library, links to that can be found on our website as well. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel and dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience audio difficulties while listening via computer speakers, sometimes this can be caused by having multiple applications open or being on Wi-Fi. So close any unnecessary things that are running. Maybe switch over to a hardwired connection if you are having difficulties. Ask a question. We have a question pane on your GoToWebinar control panel. So our presenter today will be going through a presentation, but then at the end we will definitely have time for Q&A, and so we'll want to hear from you then. Just wanted to give you a heads up on where you can ask a question. And it is now my pleasure to welcome back to the webinar series Callista Gould, a certified etiquette instructor and nationally known speaker and founder of the Culture and Manners Institute. She has an MBA from Loyola University of Chicago and a bachelor's from the University of Iowa, which we will not hold against her. She's the author of the upcoming book, The Exceptional Professional: What You Need to Know to Grow Your Career or Business. And her expertise has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, St. Paul Pioneer Press, and Dallas Morning News. And today she's presenting Exceptional Follow-Through, Turning Your Contacts into Your Advocates. Welcome, Callista.
Thank you, John. First of all, good for all of you listening for being on this webinar. The University of Minnesota gives you all these free webinars and an opportunity to grow in knowledge and gain new perspectives. The most interesting people to meet are the ones who are constantly learning. So the more you are constantly learning, the more you have to talk about when you're networking.
Excellent. And I just sent you screen control, so we'll get your screen up here and you can take it away.
There we go.
All right.
Now, many of you on here may be already expert networkers, but whether you're a master networker or a disaster at networking, I hope this exceptional follow-through webinar will make you think about networking a little differently, maybe make you try a few new things. Now, this is a great time to talk about this subject because it's kind of that time of year when you get the winter blahs. The excitement of the holidays has kind of died down, and now you're stuck inside. It's been really cold outside in some parts of the country. Even places like North Carolina got snow. So it's the time to think about getting out again, getting out and finding an event where you can meet people. Now, maybe it's an alumni event. Maybe it's a Chamber of Commerce event, maybe even a Toastmasters Club meeting if you want to learn how to practice public speaking. But commit to trying one new event in the next week. Now, so you go to a networking event, you meet a bunch of people, you collect a bunch of business cards, you leave the event, then what happens? Oops. Then you go home and crash. If you're at a conference, you go up to your hotel room and crash. You set the business cards aside and you never quite get back to them. Sometimes we have a collection of connections with no direction. But if you don't follow up with anyone, it's as if the networking never happened. It's a complete waste of your time. After the networking event is when your work has just begun. So here's our agenda today. We're going to talk about why we network. Why do we need to meet people in person? Why can't we just stay at home and meet people on the internet? We'll talk about some networking basics. There are 3 easy steps to networking, and if you master these 3, networking is going to seem easier. How to follow through. All the different ways to follow up with people and that we meet. Turning our contacts into advocates. Now that's the important part here, right? How do we make the people we meet while we're networking work for us? Why do we network? A lot of times we think of networking just in terms of career. It's good for that. That's true. When I look back on my career, only one job came from answering an ad. The rest came from networking. And it's funny, the one where I did answer the ad, they didn't even give me the job that I was responding to. They looked at my resume and said, well, we already filled that position, but we think you might be good for something else. So in a forum, that was networking in itself. But that was the only job I got from answering an ad. There are other reasons to network. Maybe you're selling a product or service. People who are in financial services and chiropractors are prolific networkers. You see them everywhere at events. Maybe you're looking for the expertise of others. I met a husband and wife couple who are home builders through a breakfast club I was in. And I'm in constant contact with them because they know all the best and most honest contractors. Do I need a plumber? Do I need a roofer? Do I need a critter control person? They are my go-to people because they will refer me to everybody good. And that the one thing about the critter control thing, when you have the critter control truck sitting in your driveway, it's big and maybe it's yellow and it's got a big picture of a critter on the side, everybody in your neighborhood knows you have a problem. It's like having the pest control truck in your driveway. It's kind of embarrassing. But the point is, I didn't have to pour through volumes of online reviews. I get the honest contractors through networking, and it's more efficient that way. Friendships, sometimes we network just to make friends. I moved to a job in New York, and I didn't know anyone in that area. My closest relative was a 4-hour drive away. And I found I should say I'm originally from the Midwest here. I'm originally from Iowa. So I moved to New York. I don't know anyone. I found out my alma mater, another Big Ten school, had an alumni group in New York. And they gathered at a bar in Manhattan to watch the football games every Saturday. So I started going to that every Saturday, and that's where I made friends in the area. Now, the picture I actually have on the screen there is the University of Minnesota's club in New York City. So they must gather for events too. So wherever you are in the world, look and see if there's a University of Minnesota alumni club in your area. There's also a higher purpose for networking. Now, this gentleman in the middle of the picture here, his name is Craig Light. And unfortunately, Craig Light just passed away last month. And I knew Craig Light through my local Chamber of Commerce, which is the Urbandale Chamber of Commerce here in the Des Moines area. It's a 5-star chamber, and Craig's funeral was packed. And one thing everyone said was, Craig was my first friend at the chamber. Whenever you walked into the room, if you didn't know anyone, Craig was always there, and he was always very welcoming. He made everyone feel like a guest of honor. Now, what a beautiful legacy to have. Who wouldn't want to be remembered that way? Any of us can have that if we just open our hearts a little and be welcoming to people at networking events. So I want you to always consider that in the back of your mind. When you're at a networking event, maybe you're talking in a group of people, you see that person off by themselves, bring them into your circle. Now, a friend of mine who's a realtor said, we cold call because we never know who needs us. Whoops, lost that. The same is true for networking. We network because we never know who needs us, and that is your higher purpose. When we meet people in person, the connection is stronger and more personal. Now, it's easier to turn someone down in a request made by email than it is to turn down a person who is standing in front of you, looking you in the eye. So when you have to make requests, make it in person. Okay, networking basics. Greet people with enthusiasm, gather information, follow up. That's all you do. Start with a smile. Start with a smile. When you look friendly, people want to talk to you. Introduce yourself. People who introduce themselves are more memorable than people who hang back and wait to be introduced. So you say, step up, put your hand out, say, hi, I'm Callista Gould, except use your own name. Now, your handshake speaks. It should say, I'm confident, I'm enthusiastic, and I'm darn glad to meet you. Now, gather information. What does that mean? That means ask questions of people. Don't look at a networking event as a room full of strangers. Look at it as a room full of stories. Each of us has something special about us, and our job is to get those stories and uncover that something special in everyone we meet. So when you take an interest in people, people will take an interest in you. So to get the conversation rolling, ask questions. What do you do for a living? Listen to the answers and ask more questions based on the answers. So how long have you been with that organization? What do you like best about that job? How did you get into that line of work? What do you do outside of work? What are your hobbies? I was helping a student recently with possible interview questions, and I asked him, what are your hobbies? And he was kind of stuck for an answer. He said, what do you mean? And I said, well, what do you like to do outside of school? And he said, I don't do anything. I just do school. I said, you have to have some outside interests. You can't be all work. So that's always an interesting question to ask people in networking, because people have different interests, and sometimes they'll surprise you. So you use this information that you are gathering by asking questions for two purposes: for your own information, for continued contact with that person. And the second reason is to introduce that person to other people with similar backgrounds or interests. I once introduced two people who had season tickets to the New York Jets, and they ended up getting married. Now, I don't know whose seats they ended up in, but they got married. They're not sitting, I guess they're not sitting in any during the playoffs. So follow up. Like I said before, after the event is when your work has just begun. Take those business cards that you collect, make some notes about any names that you remember and any of the conversations you had. Maybe you might even make a note of what they look like so you'll remember them the next time you see them. Then you prioritize the cards and determine how you're going to follow up. So how do we follow up? Oh, you got a whole list of choices here. You can send an email, you can make a phone call, You can mail a card or a letter. And when I say a card, I mean like a fold over note. You can connect on social media. You can invite the person out for coffee, schedule up a follow-up meeting. Now, you don't have to follow up with everyone the same way. Maybe a few people you will send out LinkedIn invites to, but someone else you might call on the phone and invite out for coffee. But make a plan to follow up within 1 to 2 business days of the event. If you're sending a LinkedIn invite, personalize the message. The generic thing, you can hit a button and it'll say, "Hi, I'd like to join your LinkedIn network." And that's fine, but that can go out to anybody. Let the person know where you met or why you want to be in contact with them. So, add a sentence about how you met, or you could say, "I enjoyed meeting you at the alumni event. Let's stay in touch. Your startup sounds very exciting. I look forward to the open house. Please, join my network on LinkedIn. I liked what you said about your organization's diverse culture and wondered if we could meet for coffee and talk about the possibility of working together." Now, that could be a LinkedIn invite, or it could be a note card or an email or anything. But the point is, personalize it and let the person know. That kind of creates a stronger connection, and it makes it more likely that the person will accept your invite. Now, networking is about building relationships. Your next message to the person doesn't have to be a sales pitch. It could just be, "Let's talk some more." Or maybe you don't know what to do with this person, but they might be a good time in the future. Then you just say, "Let's stay in touch." That's easy enough. Rules for a successful coffee meeting. I love it when food smiles. So I like this picture. Give the person the choice of 2 locations near where the person works, hopefully. Now, there is an executive I know in Chicago who is going to meet with a college student for coffee as a favor to a friend. Now, the executive was down near the Art Institute, if you know Chicago and all, and the college student calls up and says, "I live in Lincoln Park," which is across town. The executive simply said, "I don't." And what she was saying to the student was, "I am doing you a favor. You have to come to me." So when you invite someone out to coffee, you want to make it convenient for them. So pick something that's near them if you know where they are located, if you know where they work. Give a time limit. Could we just meet for 20 or 30 minutes? I want to be respectful of your time. Now, whoever does the inviting pays. If you invite someone out for coffee, you pick up the check. Now, let's say you get into a situation where the other person insists on paying. You can protest twice, but then just give in and let the other person pay. Let them do a nice thing for you, because what's the alternative? Do you want to get into a knockdown, drag-out fight over the coffee bill? No. What do you order? Just order coffee or tea. Don't order those whipped cream top drinks or smoothies that look like a child's drink. That's the same with an interview. You never order chicken fingers, because that's what are you, 8? Don't order something that looks like a kid's menu. It's off the kids' menu. Specialty drinks also take longer to make, and they're more expensive. So you never want to look like the person who's going to run up the expense account, especially if you're meeting with a potential client. So just have something basic, coffee or tea. Don't overdo the cream and sugar. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I put so much cream and sugar in my coffee, it's like hot ice cream. But when I'm out with people for coffee, I dial it back. I don't want them to see how much I'm putting in. How not to follow up. Don't do the aggressive sales pitch. I had a friend who invited me out for coffee, and then she pulled out a printed copy of my LinkedIn contacts, all my LinkedIn contacts. And she said, "Who of these people can you refer me to?" Wow, I was a little awkward. I felt kind of cornered. I ended up not referring any of them to her, but yeah, we're still friends. I realized she was probably under pressure from work to and trained to use that tactic, but it was a little too aggressive. Another thing you don't do is you don't add a person to an email list without permission. So you don't take those business cards and immediately add them to your email list. You always send them an email and ask them permission if they'd like to be on your email list. Never be a no-show for coffee or a meeting. Always honor your commitments. If you take someone's business card and say, I will call you next week because I'd like to learn more about your organization, or I'll email you about going out for coffee, that's a commitment. Being a professional means when you make a commitment, you honor it. Again, just like that is saying you will contact the person, then you never do. If you're not going to contact the person, don't say that. Turning your contacts into advocates. Now we're kind of going to get into the meat of the thing. Earlier when I posed the question, how do we make the people we meet while networking work for us? Now it's time to do a little road work on our network. Now, first you have to identify your goals in networking. Now try writing down 3 professional or personal goals. Now, you don't have to do it right now. You can always go back and review this webinar if you want to try this exercise later, but I just want to walk you through it and kind of give you the idea of the exercise. So examples of professional goals: join a board of directors, find leads to new jobs, be an entrepreneur, find new employees or interns, make friends in business, make friends outside of business, pursue athletic interests. My nephew was part of a keg kickball team, which involved a keg of beer and kickball. So, there's all kinds of athletic interests. Maybe you join a group that is training for a 5K or a half marathon or even a marathon. There's lots of different groups. Maybe you want to earn awards or be recognized for your achievements. How do you get to those people? Maybe you want to grow your influence in the community. Maybe you even want to run for office. What are your goals? Identify some goals, and then the next thing we do is you're going to create a spreadsheet with your list of your valuable contacts. Now, your LinkedIn list might be a good place to start. Maybe you have a holiday card list, or if not, start a list. And create a keyword for each of your goals and identify each contact with the goal keyword. So for instance, I have serve on a board of directors, influence in community, international travel as these hypothetical goals. Now, not all of your contacts are going to fit into your goals. Now, that doesn't mean you throw them out. That means you may need them in the future, or they may need something. They may know somebody they can refer you to. But again, you'll have time to review this when you go back and look at the slides, but I'm just going to run through this. The next step is to find which goals have the fewest contacts. Now that's where you need to focus your networking events. And so you're going to create an action plan to find new contacts. Where are you going to look for them? Research and find, reach out to people on social media, find events where you might meet the contacts in person. So for instance, if you want to learn to be an influence in your community, where are you going to go? Well, you might start with fundraisers where the movers and shakers in your community are. You might go to a town hall meeting for a politician. I think a lot of the politicians are out in the marketplace nowadays doing their town hall meetings. That's always good to see. Go to city council meetings and see what they're planning. I see they have a million cups in St. Paul, so you can go and see what the entrepreneurs in your community are up to. So those are some examples of events that you might tie to that. Other things in your action plan: ask your current contacts to introduce you to people. And then also cold call or send an email introducing yourself. Okay, remember, go back to why do we cold call? The same reason we network, because we never know who needs us. Somebody on the end of that cold call is going to be the person that needs you. That's why we do it. Networking is all about building relationships. College students sometimes walk away, and I know everybody in this audience is not a college student, but I work with college students a lot, so that's why I'm using them as examples. College students sometimes walk away from a networking event disappointed. and they say, no one's offered me a job. Networking is not about instant gratification. Networking is about building relationships. And that first contact at a networking event is only the beginning of your relationship. So here's a big, important principle in networking. You will get the most out of your networking experience if you help others get what they want. So for instance, when you find people to help you reach your goals, return the favor by helping them reach their goals. When you do good things for others, good things come back to you. So when you meet someone, ask yourself, what can I do for this person? Ask that person, who is your ideal target customer or client? Now, if they can't answer that, then you say, let me introduce you to my friend, the marketing consultant. Introduce people to, one of the things I say about networking is the most popular person at the party is not the one who tells the best jokes. It's the person who makes introductions. So when you're making introductions to people, that's a really good thing. Look at your current connections. Ask yourself, what have I done for any of these people lately? Now, networking is a two-way street. It's not just about what they can do for you. It's also about what you can do for them. Stay in touch. Foster your relationships with your contacts by staying in touch. You can send a thank you note for assistance or referrals. Years after I started my business, I wrote notes to some of my earliest clients and said, thank you for hiring me when I was just getting started. You ever think about that? You ever think about writing an old college professor or a grammar school teacher saying, thanks for teaching me math and making, I hated math, and then you you made it fun and interesting, or thank you for the referrals that you did for me in college and I turned out okay. Say thank you. I actually did write to one of my college professors and said thank you, and it was after he had retired, and I don't know if he remembered me or not, but he said, I never received notes like this from students, so I was honored by your letter. So write to people. Stay in touch. Congratulate people on their birthdays and anniversaries. That's easy to do on LinkedIn. Like their articles and social media posts. Check in by email or phone once in a while, and write recommendations on social media. An interesting thing about, if you want to be in touch with news, print media, or TV media, the best place to meet them is on Twitter. So just a little side note there. If you want to network with media, they're on Twitter. My final thought that I want to leave you with is a saying that everybody has heard: to bark with the big dogs, you have to get off the porch. So now is the time. Get out there and try a new event. Like I said, try that Million Cups St. Paul and see how that is. Everybody always has this event in the back of their head that they say, oh yeah, I'm going to go to that someday. Make this your week or next week. Make it your time to go try out a new event. Try out a Toastmasters club. Go to Toastmasters.com and you can find Toastmasters clubs anywhere in the world. I've actually gone to visit other Toastmasters clubs when I'm traveling. This past summer, I was at a Toastmaster club at Google in Dublin, Ireland, and that was a lot of fun. So anyway, Toastmasters is a great organization. I always like to plug them. That's actually my great nephew in the photo, and I think he's actually in the other webinar I did for the University of Minnesota too. In the last one, his parents had dressed him as Dwight from The Office for Halloween, and so I guess when he got to choose his own costume, he was Batman. So get out there and meet people. Try something new, and drop me an email and let me know how it went. I'm going to give you my contact information. Oh, before I tell you that, coming soon, I've got a book out, and it's called The Exceptional Professional. I actually go through all the steps in the whole networking exercise that I just showed you in this slide presentation. I think it should be out in March on Amazon and other outlets. But anyway, it's kind of like a handbook for being a professional, all these different kind of business etiquette on dining and meeting and traveling and public speaking. And there's even a special section on interviewing and job hunting, which I think is good. Please feel free to stay in touch. I'm on Twitter at Manners That Move. My website is cultureandmanners.com, and my email is there, cgould@cultureandmanners.com. I also have an etiquette tip of the week that's it's short and sweet and usually has a funny story in it, and you can sign up for that on my website. So, John, I guess I'm going to open it up for question and answers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely, I am a subscriber to her weekly etiquette e-news, and it's always a good quick read in my inbox each week. So I definitely appreciate that as well. But yes, definitely, if folks have questions, we have a couple in right now, but if you have questions, now's the time to let's type them in, and we got plenty of time to cover them. Before I jump into questions, I will also piggyback on some of the great networking ideas Callista talked about here in the Twin Cities with some of our regional economic groups like Greater MSP. They have a subset of some of their programming called Make It MSP, and also Make It MSP website. And they've been partnering with, they've actually partnered with our association in the past, but a variety of different community groups to have really great networking events, both for people who are here in the Twin Cities, but people who have moved to the Twin Cities. So really great community there. The Pollen Midwest group, I would definitely recommend getting on their e-newsletter and checking that out. The Chambers of Commerce of both Minneapolis and St. Paul have tons and tons of events. And also our Alumni Association, and also the colleges here at the University of Minnesota. Lots of different networking events, professional speakers. So definitely, when you get those emails with events from the University of Minnesota, you know, just take an extra 20 seconds and kind of peruse the types of things that could be of interest to you. All right, let's just jump into questions. So I need to scroll over to my other computer to read my questions, but just one sec. Here's a good question. How do you network when you're job hunting, especially if you're unemployed? Sometimes I think people that reek of desperation, myself included, make for awkward networking. What would your advice be, Callista?
That's a great question. Now, you know, that question usually comes up around the holidays because a lot of people will stay home rather than go to holiday parties because they're embarrassed that they're out of work. But I always say networking is where you need to be when you're out of work. And don't feel awkward about it because everybody has been through that before. And you're always going to meet your people that can help you when you get out. And because no one can sell you like you in person, right? Because once people meet you, they will like you, right? Hopefully. But that's why you have to get out and be there in person. Never feel like, oh, I'm out of work and that's awkward. Just tell people, oh, listen, I'm in between jobs and I'm looking. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, everybody's been through it. So networking is the best place where you can be.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. I think sometimes if people, you know, and it's definitely tough as far as like, you know, some days you might not feel like exuding that confidence, but I think sometimes when you're in events where, you know, someone's kind of the opposite of confident or really overly negative about a situation, then that's, you know, that's, I think, when there's harder networking situations. But I would definitely agree. You know, for the most part, everyone's been in that spot before. And, you know, I mean, yeah, there's definitely some people who may not be interested in helping with the job search or things like that. But that's just another kind of fish in the sea. So it's kind of, you know, if somebody's not responding, move on. What I've found especially is that a lot of people are more than willing to at least, you know, either, you know, share a few minutes or try to think of some other networking contacts. So don't get discouraged, especially if, you know, if maybe someone doesn't respond right away.
I think I have a past etiquette tip of the week on how to respond to that, how to say you're out of work when you're networking. And if that person wants to contact me, I can pull that up and send it to them.
Sure, sure. Actually, I'm going to take a crack at this question because I've actually had someone ask me this before. Callista, are you familiar with kind of like business journals where they have like a 40 under 40 list, things like that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So the question was, if my goal is to get on a 40 under 40 list as one of my professional goals, how do I go about approaching my contacts to ask them to nominate me? So yeah, good question. Definitely, like when I've known a few people who've worked for business journals before, and definitely I think the kiss of death on nominations or self-nominations or nomination, you know, let's say like your brother or your father or something like that. The one tip I heard once was like, especially if in your network you know of other people who've already been awarded that honor, that designation, that sometimes those people are good folks to write nominations, especially if they actually know you know, your work or have worked with you. And so maybe that's one of the things of planting long-term seeds with somebody, because at least my thought would be is you wouldn't go have a cup of coffee with someone for 20 minutes and then, you know, a day or two later turn around and ask them to nominate you for one of those lists. What's your thoughts, Callista?
I think usually those people are coming from a certain group, and that's a young professionals group. Mm-hmm. That's very active. And so what you need to do if you want to be on that list is you need to embed yourself in that young professionals group. And the one thing about young professionals group groups, and I think this is true of any kind of volunteer group or any group, any social group, is sometimes you go once and everyone seems aloof and in their own little cliques, but go back a second time, go back a third time, because what happens is when people see you more than once, they're like, oh, you know, that person's, you know, part of the group. And so that's when people talk to you. So get into your local young professionals group and volunteer for stuff, you know, volunteer to help run events and get people out to their events, and you do different things. And that's how you become involved in, I think that's the best way to get onto one of those lists, is become involved in a group that targets that age set. Mm-hmm. Because I really think they promote each other, and which is a good thing. That's a great thing.
We have another good question from one of our attendees. Do you have any recommendations for good ways to follow up with someone you've met once at a conference across, let's say, the country or around the world, when you may not see that person again for another year or more?
Oh, sure. That's when you follow up online. Follow up on LinkedIn and follow up by email or sending a card through the mail. That's the best time. And then if you're going to the same conference again, you might, you know, touch base with them a couple of weeks before and say, hey, I'm going to this conference again. Are you going to be there? Or maybe you're traveling and you say, hey, I'm going to be in your neck of the woods in another couple of weeks. Could we sit down for lunch or something? So that's the way you would stay in touch with those people. Mm-hmm. So I belong to the National Speakers Association, and I went to their convention a year ago. And one of the things that I did was I looked up, they will give you a list of the attendees of the conference, and I looked up all the other speakers who were going from Iowa. And the conference was down in Phoenix, Arizona, I believe. And what I did was I organized a breakfast for all the Iowa speakers. And these are people that are from all over the state that I normally wouldn't have met. And so I stay in touch with a few of them, and I have lunch with one that lives near me every couple months, and it's a great thing.
Excellent. And we have a couple other questions here, but again, we have plenty of time. So if people have additional questions, don't feel shy. Type them in, and we'll take this time to address them. Sorry, I'm just reading through one. All right. Okay, so Tina has a comment. It's invigorating to connect people. It may not happen at the event. You may recognize the need and solution connection later on. It feels like a huge win to help two people. So yeah, it's kind of going back to that point about how within your, working with your own networks. Actually, I just did it this morning by email, connecting two colleagues across the U of M who I thought had some overlap, and separately I had mentioned that to both of them, and they're like, oh yeah, that'd be great. And so I use that as an excuse to actually make the connection. And I would agree that is invigorating. What's your thoughts on that?
I think Tina's absolutely right. It's kind of a good feeling. And one of the things that I did was I worked in the music business for Sony Music, the Epic and Columbia recording labels in the Chicago Midwest branch. And actually we had a Minneapolis branch too. I think it was in Edina. Neither of those branches are open anymore because of the consolidation in the music business. But I had such a great time working with that group of people that I started organizing them on LinkedIn, and I said, hey, why don't we get together and have a Sony Music Midwest branch reunion? And we did. We got together at this old bar in Wrigleyville where we used to get together after some events, and a bunch of people showed up. One guy flew in from Florida, and people came from all over, and we had such a fun time talking and laughing about all the, working with different artists and all the crazy things that happen. And so, you don't have to find a group. Sometimes you can make a group. And so since then, I think we've had one or two other reunions, Sony Music Midwest branch reunions. And people have even said, they reconnected with people that they didn't, that they lost touch with. And so it's a lot of fun. So sometimes you can, create your own event or your own group.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because if you're seeing a need and no one else is doing it, who's better than you to do it? I felt that way in my profession too, and maybe that's why I landed in alumni relations. But go ahead.
One thing I would add to that, John, is every once in a while in the music business, we used to call a failed event a Peter Brady party. That's when you throw an event and nobody shows up. So once in a while, that's going to happen. Once in a while, you're going to throw a Peter Brady party. Just move on, and you'll laugh about it in a few years.
I think I remember that episode. All right. Here's a good question. What networking tips do you have for introverts for starting conversations with strangers when it doesn't come easily or naturally?
That's a great question. Now, first of all, one thing you should know if you're an introvert is that you don't have to be this outgoing, hey, how you doing kind of person to be a good networker, because introverts are usually very good listeners, and listening is a great skill. So if you can muster up the courage just to ask people questions, a few questions, that lets them do all the talking, and then you can do the listening and you don't have to speak up that much. So if you're an introvert, focus on asking people questions and maybe introducing people, but you don't have to be a big talker to be a good networker. Mm-hmm. And if you do want to learn how to be a good talker, there's a great book, and I'm actually reading it right now. It's by Deborah Fine. That's Fine. And the name of the book is The Fine Art of Small Talk. And I actually heard her speak somewhere, and she was really, really great. And the book is great. It's very simple. It just gives you a lot of different ideas for conversation topics and how to start conversations and that kind of thing. So I highly recommend that book. It's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes when I've been at networking events and haven't felt super outgoing, sometimes the easiest route in is maybe finding those other people who look maybe or feel, are looking maybe as uncomfortable as you feel, and connecting with them, because I think oftentimes those folks are often relieved to be connecting with somebody too. So, and that's just kind of a good icebreaker sometimes.
I agree with that. Start with the person who is standing alone and introduce yourself to that person. Once you're talking to that person, you see somebody else standing alone, flag them over, bring them into your little circle, and then just keep expanding. One time I went to an event before I knew how to do that. I went to an event in Chicago for young professionals, and this is years ago. And it was in a beautiful venue that was kind of on part of it was on a rooftop and looking out over the city, and it was beautiful, and city's all lit up at night. No one would talk to me. I mean, everywhere I turned, and it was like, well, this is kind of surprising because the people who took my money at the door seemed so happy to see me. And so sometimes, everybody was just kind of stuffy, and I thought, oh my goodness. And after that, I went home with kind of my tail between my legs, like, oh my, I was new to Chicago. It's like, I hate Chicago. But, again, I had to learn how to, approach people. You look for the person who's standing alone. Don't wait for people to come to you, to go out and search people out. Mm-hmm. And then again, try, if you didn't work out the first time, go back again. Go back, that sounds like, oh, why would I want to do that? But trust me, I've gone back to events the second time and people were friendlier than they were the first time.
All right, we've got a bunch that just came in, so we'll try to maybe rapid fire through some of these. I feel like I can never remember people's names. They seem to float out of my brain immediately. I suffer from the same thing. Do you have any suggestions on how to remember that information? Well, the one tip that I use is either just carrying a very, very small notebook where, once you've talked to somebody and walked away, just taking a second to either write it down, or sometimes even in your notes app on your iPhone. I've admittedly used that to remember names. Do you have any tips in that area?
Yes. The first thing you do is you repeat the name back to them. They introduce themselves and you say, how do you do, John? Repeat the name back. And so as John is talking to me, I'm thinking, John. I'm trying to cement that name in my head. Now, once I go across the room and I talk to somebody else, I look back and I say, that's John, that's Mary, that's, Colin, anybody that you've met before. Quiz yourself throughout the event. Try to remember names. Now, if you find you can't remember somebody's name, ask somebody else. Tell me the name, and do you remember the name of that person over there? But quiz yourself throughout the event and learn names that way. Mm-hmm. Another thing, people always say word association. Does it rhyme with anything? Maybe you meet Mary and Larry and Harry, and can you make some kind of word association? I had a group of people for a presentation. I had to memorize the names of these executives. And what I did was I looked at where they fell in the alphabet. And so, for instance, I found that they followed a pattern. Like there was LMNO. So there was Lyle, there was Marilyn, there was, they fell in a pattern, and that's how I memorized the names.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any caveats or tips for networking and following up across generations? It's easy to do when the other generation is my same demographic, harder if I'm trying to connect with someone much younger than me.
That's a huge issue these days, and even within the workplace, because there are 4 different generations, they say, working in the workplace. And I think, the older people are more likely to use a phone rather than text. The younger people are more likely to text, or, the best thing to say is, how would you like me to follow up with you? One time I was speaking to a group of Kiwanis, and it was about 80 men over the age of 80. And the funny thing about them is I asked them what their biggest etiquette pet peeve was. And it wasn't rude cell phone behavior. It was young men who walk into a bar or restaurant with their ball caps on.
Huh.
They expect them to remove their ball cap, and that was their biggest etiquette pet peeve. So, yeah, there's the different generations think differently.
All right, here's a very good question, and I've seen this before. All right, it's a little it's a good long question, so hang with me here. When do you change your approach with networked contacts? For instance, I interned for a woman that kind of, she writes, ghosted me. I'd say abandoned that person when she decided to enter back into her certain industry and stop pursuing her own business. The person never heard from her again until this week when she asked me to connect her with my contacts. Excuse me. It was a challenging balance of frustration and wanting to cultivate this relationship. That's a really good question. How would you approach that, Calista?
That's very interesting. So let me repeat this so I understand it. It's the person kind of abandoned them for a while.
Yep.
When they were no longer useful, and then suddenly they appear back on the scene.
Correct.
It depends on how much you want to be back in touch with that person. I don't know that I would trust. I'm not a very trusting person, so I would tread carefully with that. You know, because a person who pulls that is kind of a user.
Yeah.
So, although, you know, I'll take a step back on that and say you never know what's going on in people's lives too. So that time they were absent, maybe something was going on that they were preoccupied with, you know, an illness in the family or something like that. You never know.
Sure. This is kind of in the same vein, but might be. Or actually, no, I'm going to switch down to another question here. After networking for 3 years during graduate school in AmeriCorps, what is the best way to alert your contacts that you are now in the market for a job?
Oh, wow. That's, you know, AmeriCorps is a great organization. So you can, I would even send out a little note. This is what I've been up to in AmeriCorps. This is some of the things that I was working on, and here's what I'm looking for in a job. You know, that could be interesting to. I have a friend named Kate who spends her summers up in Alaska, and she's actually a boat captain of a 50-ton boat. And so every once in a while, she'll send out these little emails to a group of friends, and she'll talk about what she's up to in Alaska, and they're always fascinating. So I would just do some stories about what you were working on in AmeriCorps and what kind of skills you were developing and what you're interested in. Now, don't make it too long. Everybody's got a short attention span these days, so just make it something short and send that out to a group of friends, and I'm sure they'd love to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Any advice for those
also
who are
posted on LinkedIn too?
Yep. Another question, any advice for those who are interested in pivoting into a new industry for which you haven't worked before?
Oh, tap the alumni connections for that. Go back to your University of Minnesota alumni and see who's in that industry, and see if somebody will sit down and chat with you. Sit down and have coffee and say, this is the direction I'm interested in. Can you tell me about how you got into that field and how? I think the alumni connections are the best ones for that. Or maybe you will see somebody on LinkedIn that you know that is in that field. That's another way to get in.
Mm-hmm.
But alumni connections are great for that.
And actually, I'll use that. You didn't know I was going to use this as a segue or a plug, but one project that I'm working on right now with the Alumni Association is that hopefully by early mid-February, we're going to be rolling out an online platform that allows people to either create accounts or sync with their current LinkedIn account to basically kind of volunteer those areas that they're happy to help with, whether it's informational interviews, resume review, talking about their industry. And we think it's going to be a really great way for students to find alumni who are willing to help, but also on the other side of the coin, a way for alumni to connect with other alumni about those areas. And so if you are an alum or student of the University of Minnesota, stay tuned to your email because we will be rolling that out in the next month. So stay tuned, because we really hope that that's going to be a really user-driven way for people to find those kind of diamonds, and not diamonds in the rough, but just those alumni and friends who are actually are willing to, share their time or industry expertise.
And alumni are very enthusiastic about helping fellow alumni. Always.
Yeah, here's a good question. Is there a way to salvage a networking relationship that was not followed up on or not nurtured for a period of time? If so, what is the best way to go about that? So it's kind of almost like the opposite side of that question we heard earlier.
Right. You know what? You just have to kind of step lightly back into the person's life, and maybe you start if they have things up on LinkedIn or Twitter or social media, you start by liking some of their things and that they're posting, and working your way back onto their radar that way, or maybe just come out with an apology and say, you know what, I forgot to follow up with you, or I didn't follow up with you the way I should have. I'm a much more mature person now, and I'd like to try again. I really thought you were a great person to know, and I'd like to try again. And something like that. Come with your hat in your hand. I actually had a woman that I went to college with, and she was not friendly to me when I left college, and she contacted me after many years and said, "Hey, I saw you on LinkedIn. It looks like you're doing great, and you look great, and blah blah blah." And so we became back in touch with, and I welcomed her back.
Sure.
It just doesn't hurt to reach out. Maybe they take you back, maybe they ignore you. I've had other people contact me too who I know are lying about their resume on LinkedIn. And I do not accept those people into my network. If I know they're lying about somebody was lying about an Ivy League degree. Sure. And I knew he didn't have one. So.
All right, last question. Do you have any tips for networking strategies for people who are new parents? So maybe that's a little harder to get back in the game if they got a new little one at home.
That's, you know what? I don't have any kids, so that's a tougher one for me, John. That might be a better one for you to field. I'm not quite sure about that. That's not my area of expertise. But I guess just getting out there and meeting people just go out to different events. A lot of times you meet people through events with your kids. Soccer games and things like that. Those are birthday parties. Those are all networking opportunities too. So
yeah, depending on the age of kids, like as far as like definitely with newborns, if you have a spouse or partner at home with you, having he or she on board with helping. So let's say like, hey, this networking event's coming up on Thursday night. Can you make sure, maybe skip your bowling night that night so I can go to this event or things like that. I think in my experience, the more you can have a, supportive partner or supportive family network to help enable you to go out and do those things when you do have kids at home. That definitely helps. And then, yeah, absolutely. As they get older, whether it's kind of the preschool things or sports activities or other school related activities, think of those don't think of, like Callista said, don't think of those just as people in a room. Think of them as stories, or, the spouse of somebody who's at the same preschool as you might not be in the industry that you're wanting to get in, but they might be related to someone. I mean, I'm a really big proponent of kind of, you know, networking to the point where kind of serendipity happens. And so that's just kind of one of my my thoughts on that. But
seems to me the Wall Street Journal just had an article about a woman who is a professional woman who brought a baby to a conference, to a professional conference. So, you know, babies are portable. Just pack them up and bring them with you.
Yeah. Well, Callista, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your insights and what I mean. We had a good solid 30 minutes of Q&A here, so thank you for sharing your time and expertise with our alumni, students, and friends out there today.
Thank you very much, John, for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right, take care. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today. And again, we have coming up some great webinars in February and beyond, so you can check those out at umnalumni.org/virtual. And in conclusion, just want to thank you again for taking part in this webinar series. And if you'd like to support the work of the Alumni Association and become a member, I'm a member. Definitely look up umnalumni.org/membership. We welcome all to these free webinars, but definitely appreciate your support of the Alumni Association. And that's the conclusion for today's webinar. Rah, rah, rah for Ski U Ma. This is John Ruzek signing off, and I'll see you next time.